Fintech Chatter Podcast, brought to you by Tier 1 People, the leaders in executive search for fintech ventures.
Hello and welcome to Fintech Chatter, the show where fintech leaders join me for a chat. I'm your host, Dexter Cousins, and today's guest is Chad West from Argent. Argent has grown into one of the largest smart wallets on Layer 2 blockchain, with over 2 million users, hundreds of millions in TVL, and over 50 million raised in investment to date. Many of our Aussie listeners will be familiar with Chad from his days at Revolut. It's here that I first met Chad and was blown away by his talent. But what impressed me most is his personal journey. As an early Revoluter, Chad helped grow the business to 10 million customers, and he's here making his Fintech Chatter debut to share his insights. Chad, great to finally get you on Fintech Chatter. I've been hassling you for, I think, a couple of years now.
Yeah, I think it's been about 5 years of like, let's do it next week.
Yeah, it has. Yeah. But mate, awesome to have you here. Really excited for this one because there's a lot of stuff that we're going to cover that I think is really relevant, and I'm sure everybody's itching to hear about your Revolut experience. But no, it's an interesting time for marketers. I think it's probably one of the kind of disciplines that seems to be most at threat from AI and the promise of that. You're, without doubt, kind of hands down the kind of pin-up for marketing and growth marketing. Whenever I'm talking to clients, and they kind of ask for examples, and what you did at Revolut is just, it's kind of, it's incredible. But we'll hear more about that. But before we do, what have you been doing since Revolut?
Good question. I think maybe the first sort of year of leaving Revolut, people often forget. One thing that's not spoke about enough is when you have the privilege of working for a company like Revolut, one of these rocket ship experiences that are so far and few, right?
Yeah.
It's really hard to think, what do I do next? Because on one hand, you want that same intensity and that same success that you've had over the last 5 or 6 years. And you have to be a bit of a Houdini to guess what's the next big thing and which company will take off. On the other side, you're often pressured to start your own thing because a lot of people aren't sure where to go next, or they're fed up of working with someone. And I found myself torn between the two, where very fortunately, I had no shortage of companies seeing that I was leaving and saying, let's have a call and let's speak, but not being really convinced by any of them. And then on the other hand, really wanting to do my own thing, but not trying to rush it, trying to ensure that I nail down the right idea and I don't become what I call a tourist in the tech industry, which is bouncing from buzz to buzz, right? You go from fintech to AI to super fast grocery delivery, which I sort of did a lot of advising and investing, which sort of took up most of my time across various different companies and spaces. And then finally, blockchain was always an area that I really wanted to go into. For me, it was the next step, the sort of next level of intensity in fintech, if you will, because, the reality is, while fintech's been amazing, it hasn't really changed anything.
Yeah.
Right? I know that's a quite a bold thing to say, but the way banking operates is still the same, right? Yeah. Most of these fintechs are just doing things faster, cheaper, more slicker.
Yeah.
But the actual structures and systems remain the same.
Yeah.
So when you look at blockchain,
I was going to say, if I look at Revolut, it's one of the few examples where I think genuinely they've actually changed, the product for a customer, whereas 90% of what I've seen, I think, has been, the innovation might be in the back end and is making a bank operate more efficiently, but as a customer, I'm still getting the same crappy products.
Yeah, 100%. I think what Revolut's sweet spot was it brought it's kind of the strapline we came up with before I left, which was, one app, all things money.
Yeah.
It was taking that Asian super app model and bringing that experience to the West. So I think what Revolut did is, again, nothing really changed. It was still working behind the scenes, pretty much similar to most financial companies, but it was that user experience and sort of bringing everything into one. But, then I found myself wanting to go into blockchain, which is just a whole nother level of complex. The entire system is different. It really aligned with my views of being permissionless, being open, and, people having a sense of financial freedom. So for me, it was more like, this is truly exciting technology. It's still such an unknown space in its early sort of stages. So it seemed like the right kind of mental challenge that I wanted.
I want to talk a little bit earlier of your career, because I think it's really interesting to see the journey that you've gone on. And, one thing that really kind of struck me was your kind of first gig, which, was doing work in government and, kind of politics. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that first role and kind of maybe how that, kind of helped shape, some of the, the kind of strategies and things that you would have gone on later on in your career?
Yeah, basically, I think like most people in politics, I had a chip on my shoulder. I was over opinionated, and politics was the right place to go. But I think the reality is, when I was younger, I was always kind of really interested in politics and kind of assumed that's the route I wanted to go down. Right, I enjoyed arguing and fighting matches with people at college and university and things. And then quickly realized it probably wasn't for me, actually. I think the bulk of my role was very sort of boring. It was a lot of press and media relations. It was a lot of public sort of outreach, focus groups, all that kind of stuff, listening to people's concerns, feeding that into communication channels for legislation. And I very quickly realized I'm quite a creative person. I'm someone who thinks outside of the box, and politics is not a place where people typically like to think outside of the box, right? Everything for me was just a bit slow-paced, a bit stale, very predictable, the sort of playbooks of the 1950s, right? And it just sort of hit me one day that actually I love technology, and coupled with that, I'm pretty good at this old marketing thing, right? So I wanted my first sort of break. My first break into the marketing world and into the tech world was actually at Rocket Internet. For anyone who doesn't know, it's kind of a $100 billion incubator which just spins out copycat companies and scales them all over Europe and Asia. And worked on a couple of companies there. One notable was called Helpling, which was basically like TaskRabbit. So you could hire cleaners, handymen, gardeners from the app, like the Uber for household services, basically. And took that across Europe. It was in UK, Germany, France, Italy. Then we took it over to Australia. And then we also took it over to Singapore as well. So quite an exciting first gig to be kind of thrown in the middle, straight into a sort of growth marketing role. And then straight into a international company as well, sort of taking the business into, for me, very strange markets, that I'd never had any experience with. So that was my first sort of draw in. And I was very fortunate that it was the kind of, Rocket Internet kind of had a very similar culture to Revolut, where it's a very data-driven KPI environment. You get really pushed into the deep end and kind of a lot of responsibility from day one. So it kind of set me up pretty well, actually, for going into Revolut, especially at those early days. Yeah.
What's correct me if I'm wrong, but was Revolut 25 people when you joined?
Yeah, it was somewhere in that mid-20 range. Yeah.
Wow. So what was it like? And I guess first of all, kind of taking your mind back, like what got you excited about going to a business that was 20 odd people, hadn't really proven itself? How many customers did they have at this point?
God, I mean, the first thing I'll say is the word customers, right? So fintech has an issue with saying users, and what they actually mean is downloads and bots and signups. In terms of genuine customers, people that actually ordered a card and made a payment and were using it daily, weekly, and monthly, it was probably in the region of 50K. Right. So not a bad amount, but again, it was still a very mishmash consumer group in the sense of like most people weren't using it very frequently. It was just being used by a niche of like air stewards and people who work in the sort of aviation industry. But it was definitely that sort of a good learning of clearly, what the product market fit was and who the target user was at that early stage.
That's really fascinating, actually, that was the kind of core group of users. Because you would think from the marketing that it was all kind of millennials who were traveling all the time. And
it's funny because when I joined Revolut, one of the first questions I was asked is, what is the strategy, right? Which fair enough, because there was no one doing it, right? There was just Revolut was mostly interns at that point who were just getting their hands dirty. They were fresh grads and trying many things. So I was the first kind of dedicated person to come in and lead that function. And for me, the strategy was clear from day one. And I remember it not actually going down very well with people because a lot of people internally had this view that, Revolut was the Amazon of banking and we should be going after this banking user and competing with the likes of Monzo, Starling, N26. And I had to make the point of, well, firstly, they all have bank licenses. We don't. Secondly, they all have bank-like features like direct debit, standing orders, things you need in banking, and we don't. So why are we going to fight for this very small niche audience where we cannot compete with them from a product perspective, and we do not have the assurance of saying to people that we're a legitimate bank and your money's protected and all the rest of it. So I made this call of saying, whether we like it or not, until the product catches up, we are a travel company, right? We are going to say travel abroad with no fees and transfer money abroad with no fees. It's going to be plain English, not sexy, because there's a huge market to sweep up, particularly in Europe with the issue of cross borders and currencies and being the biggest travelers in the world as well. And that's how Revolut kind of there's a big strategy behind it, but that's how it really did sort of strive to take over those people in the early days, because we were far more razor focused on a clear target user where we had a very minimal competitive landscape and a very good solution for their problems.
Yeah. It's an example that I use, I think, pretty much all the time when people say, what's the best example of a growth business? And, I'll either point to Revolut and Afterpay, because I think they both did two very similar things. Revolut pointed and said, hey, if you're a millennial and you go traveling every weekend and you're getting stung for fees every time you go, use this card, right? You won't get stung for fees. And Afterpay was similar in that, hey, if you want to look like this on Saturday night and you don't have a credit card, we can help you look like that. And then to merchants, it was, hey, look, if your sales are going like that on a Saturday and you want to see them do that, try this out. And I think it was, obviously the execution of it was critical, but I think it was just the simplicity of the messaging and who it was targeted to. And it was just absolutely crystal clear, whereas you'd see other kind of buy now, pay laters at the time, and they're kind of targeting the millennial market, but then, they're shouting out, yay, we've won a new client, and it's Bunnings, which is where I go every weekend because it's a DIY shop, right? It's like the B&Q of Australia, right? Well, that doesn't kind of quite stack up, right? Like that was, if you're targeting millennials, that's not something you want to be shouting about. But I think that's one of the kind of real things that really still stays with me about the Revolut journey was just that simplicity in the early days of just being so targeted on what they were doing.
That's it. I mean, just because it's so easy in the marketing world to get lost in, we need to be doing 100 things at once, right? We need to be competing with every single person out there. And the best marketers, in my opinion, are the ones that just take a breath, look at the market, look at the data and think, actually, what's step one and how will step one lead to step two? And too many go in with that more sort of messy strategic mindset. And I think often that's what does not serve them very well. So we knew our strengths, we knew our weaknesses, we knew who the right target user was, we knew the right channels in terms of how to acquire those people, the right positioning and messaging to really resonate with them. And then we started to sort of build from there. So it wasn't just about buzzy millennials in big cities who travel all the time. For me, it was also thinking about the future of, who are going to be the users that will actually make you money. And that's typically an older demographic, right? Let's say the 35 plus market. And there's huge expat communities that live in Spain and Dubai and Australia. So it was also, we did a really good job of not just focusing on home turf and getting those people, but thinking about all the Brits abroad who who are sending money back home to pay for mortgages in the UK or their kids' schools, or they're frequently traveling.
Well, all my family in the UK have got Revolut cards, but they didn't have them until I had a Revolut card and said, "You got to check this out," right? And it's, I think, what it's still, and it sounds so simple now, but 5 years ago, Chad, like my mum couldn't send. Now she'll send a text, right? There's 10 quid. Kids on school holidays, go and buy them an ice cream, right? She couldn't do that in the past.
Yeah.
And it's just those little things, right, where you think, it kind of doesn't, but it actually means a lot to my mum, right? And I think the amount of money I've saved on fees, it's like, it literally is in the thousands.
Yeah, I mean, often I hear, I had a friend once who, he saved thousands in fees. He lives abroad. He's still got a place in London. He's got a mortgage to pay. He uses Revolut constantly. And then he was complaining to me about, the price of his metal plan. And I went through with him, and I sort of mental math worked out roughly just that month how much he'd saved in fees. And it was about 10x the cost of what he was paying for a plan. And then he really saw the value. And it's one thing I actually sent feedback over to Revolut recently, where I was like, you guys really have to start sending like a monthly summary where you just show people in plain black and white how much you've saved them that month. Because it's not good enough to just make them try and figure it out for themselves or just to say high level statements like, we save you money. Like, show them the value. And then when they see that in pounds and dollars and euros, they're going to be far more incentivized to scream and shout about you, tell their friends and family, put a good post out there. So it's something they're still not doing. It was a mistake of mine. I should have done it when I was at the helm, and they're still not doing it.
So 50,000 customers when you joined, 10 million when you left. I want to talk about that journey to the first million, because that must have just been like, kind of one of those moments in life where, I think that movie, the, Social Network, about Facebook, when they get to, what is it, a million or a billion customers or whatever, and they've got the ticker kind of going down. That must have been just like unbelievable to see that number hitting.
I'll be entirely honest with you. It didn't really have much of an impact on me or my emotions. And maybe that's just because we are heartless robots, and our emotions have been sucked out of us. But I think the reality is it was just so ingrained to be grounded at Revolut, in the sense that, like, we're still getting started. Yeah. There wasn't room to be complacent and say, great, we've made it, we've got 10 million users. The reality was, not all of those users were as active as we wanted them to be. Not all of them were making us any money. Not all of them were referring friends. So I actually looked at that number and saw more problems than I did solutions. So it was definitely a moment where you have a drink that night and, you all kind of celebrate, but it's very case of like, tomorrow, forget about it. We're moving on. There's loads more to do. And I should say it was, when I was leading the helm, so when I was the one making the decisions, it was 10 million. I stayed at Revolut, I think, another year after that, where I sort of just kind of got to do what I wanted to do, sort of thing. It was like, shall we say, early retirement. Yeah. And when I left, the company was 20 million users. Yeah. So that system that we built, which was me and our my head of growth at the time, which was Val Scholes, who's incredible and you should speak to as well. We basically built this system that was just automated and the cog was moving. And within a year, or just over a year, I think it was, there's nearly 10 million users.
Mate, I remember it, right? Because I was actually helping you guys with the CEO role for Australia. Yeah. And at the time it was 4 million customers. And by the time we got Matt signed up, which was, I think, November. So this was April. I remember Easter we were talking. And then by November, it was 10 million customers. And I was like, what? Is this a typo? Right? It was just unbelievable.
It was stressful as well. Like it's easy to sit there and talk about the highs and put out buzzwords and say 10 million, 20 million. But the reality is, behind the scenes, it's actually more stressful, because on one hand, you're growing so rapidly that everyone's watching you, right? Yeah. The regulators are watching you, your partner banks, any partners you use, they're all sat there thinking, God, can we handle this? Do we still want to maintain this? Do we need to be keeping a closer eye on them? Growth's doing its job. At the same time, our other internal departments in the company scaling with that demand, whether it's customer support, compliance, risk. And then on the marketing side, again, any good marketer won't get carried away with vanity metrics like, user numbers. And, you got to think about, how do they define a user? Is it a real user, or is this just cheap shit acquisition that they've been bringing in? And then you've got that whole other stress head of like, okay, now we need to think about activation, retention, revenue, and that journey those users go on. So, definitely an amazing buzz and a great success, of course. But there's so much more that doesn't get spoken enough about around sort of you get it.
Yeah, and I remember that at the time there was the whole kind of Revolut Monzo thing, and there was a big love in with Monzo and a big hate in with Revolut, and I couldn't understand it, to be honest. And the reason why I couldn't understand it was that everything that I was seeing and hearing and coming from Revolut was just transparency and authenticity. And it's like, look, this is who we are. Like, we're on a mission. Like, you either like it or you don't, right? Whereas I felt like with Monzo, it's kind of trying to kind of always appease to everybody and do stuff to, kind of be cool, rather than actually this is like the super focus that Revolut had and still has.
You nailed it, because I obviously oversaw the communications team, so we had to deal with all the crisis and the reputation stuff. And there's many reasons why. I think, one, the media always, the UK media are probably among the worst in the world in terms of building people up and tearing them down. It doesn't matter whether it's British companies or celebrities or whoever. Sadly, that is the toxicity that exists in our media
Did your kind of very first job come in handy then when you were doing PR and crisis comms?
I mean, everyone at Revolut knows how hands-on I was on the PR and comms side, far more than I am today. And it was needed, because every week there was a new fire that had to be put out. But the other hand was Revolut, there's not many Revoluts in Europe, and especially in the UK. We don't build big global tech companies like the US do. And there's many reasons for it. Some will say regulation and all this kind of stuff, funding. For me, one of the main reasons is we just don't work as hard as the US. We are so overly obsessed with this idea of culture and being super nice. And Revolut just kind of made this point clear, which is, we do have a culture that is more akin to, a football team, which is that the highest performers will stay and the lowest ones will move somewhere else. Right. And the coach has to be tough and on top of you. And, Nick purely created a culture where he wanted people to work hard, but they would be highly rewarded in terms of their positions in the company, their remuneration, their shares in the company. And he didn't try and hide it. It was out there plain to see. So you knew exactly whether it was for you and for it's not. And I often meet a lot of these culture and HRE type people who are trying to have these horrible playbooks implemented in every company everywhere.
The Netflix playbook, and it's like, look, we're not Netflix, right?
The beauty of startups is that every company is different. I love the fact that the culture can be anything, right? And there's not some preset, sort of rules of this is what your culture is. And it's
organic, right? Like every person that comes in kind of adds and changes the kind of dynamic of the culture, right? It's like almost like an living organism that, feeds off things and kind of evolves.
100%. And at the end of the day, a lot of people can sit there and say, okay, that doesn't align with me. And that's absolutely fine. That's good, right? That means right? And it's not the kind of environment for you. And then there's a lot of people out there that would, completely attack it and say, this is not the right way to run a company. Revolut is a very profitable, biggest success story probably in European tech. It's a prime sort of evidence that actually that is a culture of success. You might not like it, and I'm not saying there aren't other models that can work, but it doesn't mean you get to shout it down and say it's wrong just because it doesn't fit your
I read some stats today that I think I might put the kind of infographic up, but they're pretty impressive. I think it's 20 million customers now, profit £454 million or £500 million profit, I think, just been announced. £2.2 billion, or I think, in revenue. Just amazing stats, right, for a business that's not even 10 yet.
Yeah, exactly.
Or just turned 10.
I think a lot of digital banks are. I think Revolut did a great job of diversifying its revenue, right? I think a lot of fintechs are very much, they have one or two avenues of revenue. And if ever there's an impact, such as things like lockdown or something, or a recession, they're suddenly in the red and struggling. So Revolut was very clever in having probably about 7 or 8 different avenues of monetization. And I think like most digital banks, it's also highly benefited from high interest rates in the last couple of years, which I've noticed is why a lot of these guys do have a bigger surge than expected. You can see that high interest have benefited them.
Mate, sometimes you just got to make it through, right, to get to the point where all of a sudden you look like a genius because some external factors have come in and kind of helped, right?
Take the glory.
Exactly. And I think, look, you kind of spot on, because I remember when COVID did happen and you're thinking, all right, well, that's Revolut gone, right? Like, travel. And if anything, the business actually grew because what people started to do was invest. And so you've got the investment, the crypto side of the business that then starts to kind of make up for the loss in the use of the travel card.
Don't get me wrong, Revolut did struggle big time during lockdown because everything went down, right? Yes, people were investing and doing crypto and stock trading, but it still wasn't making up for the loss of card transactions. But what Revolut did that was clever was they raised a really good war chest, right? Which is that, there was money on the table, the market was good, the terms were fair, and Revolut did a big round that would just basically secure its future for the next few years. So thank God they did, because they still would have been able, in my mind, to raise capital during that time, but it would have been a far better deal on the table. It was, and I think a few other banks, maybe, I'm not saying they predicted COVID by any means, but maybe it was just right time, right place, but they had that cash injection to keep them going.
What was the point that you kind of realized my time's done here?
I hate this question because I feel like I give a different answer every time. I think one thing I would say is it was the hardest decision I've probably made in my life, was to leave Revolut. I'd been there very early doors. I'd been there for 5 years. Everyone knew Chad of Revolut because I was so invested in this company. I worked 12, 13, 14 hours a day, 7 days a week, didn't take holidays. First thing I did when I woke up at 4 o'clock in the morning was go straight to Google, straight in my emails. And that was not something I needed to do. That's just how emotionally invested and attached I was to this company. And there came a point where I had to just decide, what kind of person am I at this stage in my career? Am I someone who is going to reflect the new people coming in, where I'm going to be a bit of a bureaucrat, a bit of a face, moving slow, or have I still got it in me in my younger years to go and do another one, or and move fast and break things and innovate? And I stuck around. I told you, the role became a little bit too big for me at one point. The expectations of the company were just so much higher. The budgets were so much higher. There was regulation and red tape everywhere, and it just wasn't the right environment for me anymore. And I kind of knew that was the case. So I'd done my bit, because the people you need in year 1 to 4 are not very rarely the people you need in 4 to 8, right? So I was kind of humble enough to think, do you know what? It's someone else does need to take this stick now and take it forward. And I sort of danced around the company working on like special projects for a year, working on some expansion of new markets, working on some big sort of brand and marketing deals with celebrities and things. But I just realized it was a bank now, right? It was a big bank with, 5,000-6,000 employees. And that wasn't the environment that I wanted to be in anymore. And I was spending more times in meetings with guys who were coming from big banks. And, I was used to being in rooms with hyper intelligent technical people coming up with crazy solutions to fix things. And suddenly that whole mindset changed. So this is not me shitting on them, because they're needed. I understand that, the company gets that size and it needs those kind of people there to keep regulators happy, or to, things like this. But it was time for me to go. There was not really much more I could offer the company at that stage, and the fire was no longer in my belly like it used to be. And I'm someone who, if I don't have that fire in my belly and I don't wake up every day with a real sense of purpose, I just become this pretty shitty person where I'm just not happy and not fulfilled.
I talked in the intro about me being really impressed by your talent, but then as I got to know you, the thing I was even more impressed by was your work ethic, values, and the kind of background that you came from as well. And look, I think it's one of the reasons why we're connected, right? Because we kind of had not dissimilar kind of upbringings and challenges to face in our earlier lives. What's, do you mind talking a little bit about your background and maybe how that kind of gave you the principles and discipline to do what you did at Revolut, and kind of that real kind of focus on just making things happen?
Yeah. Look, I think in a nutshell, I grew up in the foster care system. So growing up, I was sort of bouncing through homes, fighting my way through life. By the time I got to sort of 15, 16, I was then sort of went into like emergency homeless accommodation. You'll know the old bed sits the council used to give you. I was just completely estranged from family, spent my whole life just sort of never being in one place. And then it's suddenly 15, 16, still at school, studying your GCSEs and still in the Air Cadets, wearing my little beret and things. I'm now cooking and cleaning for myself and topping up electric meters. And it was just pretty surreal. So yeah, it wasn't a pleasant life by any means, but it sounds crazy to say, but I wouldn't change it for the world, because it gave me everything I think I have. All the weaknesses I have today, I would say I've developed post then, now that life's become more comfortable. All my strengths are pre then. Nothing gets me down. Maybe that is a bad thing. Sometimes people say that to me, which, you should talk about this and that. But I'm one of those people where it is what it is. Yeah. Literally everything around me can come crumbling down. It won't buckle me. I won't get emotional. I'll just sit there and think I can rebuild. Yeah. And that proved so worthy in my career, because in your career, you're always going to have ups and downs. And some people really get caught up in the downs and it affects them. And for me, it was just, it is what it is, was always my mentality. I think on the other hand, I knew I had to work harder and smarter than everyone around me, because the reality is the tech industry, and maybe even the banking industry, generally speaking, is consisting of very privileged people. Who and good for them, by the way. This is not me shitting on those people, but they've had great families who've put them to great schools. They've gone to great universities, and life's been easier for them, but they've also made it, right? And but they get complacent and comfortable, and they don't deal with down the same as me. So I feel like I knew who those people were. I knew the people that might kind of step in my way because of that culture and that side of the world. But that just kept me humbled, which is like, I need this more than anyone else, because when I'm living in London paycheck to paycheck, and if I lose a job and I can't afford rent next month, I'm all the way back to square one, right? Whereas a lot of people, they have savings to fall back on, parents to fall back on. So I think for me, it also just kept me very humble at every stage of my career, which is no matter how much money I've got in the bank account or what my job title is, I'm not better than anyone else. I'm still fighting for survival. The odds are still against me. And that's just kept me constantly motivated and driven, which is easy to lose when life gets more comfortable. Yeah.
And, I was having a similar conversation with my wife actually just the other day about how, I've got this great life and I love it, but there's always this thing that's deep inside, right, where kind of you're like, it could all be gone tomorrow, and I've just got to kind of keep on it. And so I really get what you're talking about there. Funny that you mentioned the whole kind of US and the work ethics. I had a article out on LinkedIn last week, which is a previous guest, a guy called Richard Joffe, who's a 2-times exited founder, really successful, has now launched a insurtech in Australia, and kind of got a bit hammered by some elements of the press because he was kind of equating it to, a startup as being like a war, and hey, look, you got to be honest with your people and let them select themselves out, right? And say, look, this is what you're getting into, which, absolutely the right approach. But what do you think, kind of when you're, particularly when you're looking at marketing, and there's we're at a point where no doubt AI is having an impact, right? If I look at the last 12 months, the most amount of people who've been made redundant in my network are marketers or product marketers, right? If I look at the roles that we've had no growth marketing opportunities, right? And very few in product. And so, and certainly what I'm hearing from our clients is, hey, look, our expectations have changed, right? We're not going to pay $300,000 for a CMO who's just going to dish work out to agencies and kind of, play arbitrage with, suppliers and service providers. What do you see as being the way for marketers to kind of really make themselves relevant in this, new, kind of era that we're starting to enter?
So there's quite a lot to undig there, and it's a really good question right now that I think a lot of founders are queuing up to get answers for. I think one mistake is a lot of founders and companies, whoever it is, they don't understand the difference between marketing and growth.
Yeah,
they think it's all the same, and that they just need someone to do growth, right? The reality is a marketer is someone who is at the top of funnel, right? So they're going to be working on brand building, on customer acquisition, right at the top, and bringing people into your product. When you hire a growth team, they're focused on the more middle and the bottom of the funnel. So they're looking at activation, retention, and revenue. So the way to think of it is, marketing is the delivery company bringing all the food into the restaurant, and the growth teams are the ones prepping the food, cooking it, and getting it out. And a lot of founders get conflated between those two things. There's also an issue where a lot of marketers put growth in their title, when in reality they're not growth. They're very much marketers, and companies just don't have enough due diligence or a good process in their hiring to root that out. The second thing is a lot of founders and companies don't know what they need. Right? They're just sat there saying, we need to grow, we've raised some money, let's hire a head of marketing or a head of growth. What I would always advise is if you're in a position where you haven't hired your first big CMO or head of marketing yet, use someone smart internally, someone who's maybe from an ops background or data background in the company, to basically A/B test different marketing channels to get a feel of what's working and what's not. What does the data say is moving the cogs? And ultimately, what is your target user? What is it you're trying to actually achieve here? When you have some kind of sense of what positioning and messaging is right, who the right user is, and what kind of channels are bearing some fruit, then you're kind of in a position to think, okay, now we need a head of marketing who can scale this, right? Who can take this, build a great team. So the one thing I would recommend, the best way to solve this is if you are falling into that bucket where you are, a founder or you're some C-suite in a company and you're responsible for, starting a new function or changing the growth mindset, is find someone who knows what they're talking about, who's been there and done it at different stages of a company journey, and just pick their brain. You'd be amazed how many of them will be happy to have a chat, or they'll know someone who knows them. I get asked all the time from VCs. I got friends who are at Sequoia and Index and other funds who are always like, Chad, can you speak to this guy for 10 minutes and just, get him on the right track? And I always make time for it. So know exactly what you're kind of hiring. The other one is they don't do enough testing to know if this person's right. What's crazy to me is I meet a lot of founders and they will maybe speak to a candidate for about 45 minutes and then make a call and say, I'm going to outsource the entire growth of this company to this one person that I spent 45 minutes talking to.
Do you know what's really interesting, right, with that? And I remember reading this about 12 years ago. Guy called Laszlo Bock, and he was the first HR director for Google. Okay. And so he kind of, he wrote this book about the whole Google way that he came in and started to implement processes. And there's something that he said in it which really struck a chord with me and helped me kind of develop the recruitment process that I've got today. And that is that the way in which kind of competency-based interviews are set up, you're basically hiring the best storyteller, right? Because the skills that are required to do well in the job usually aren't required to do well, in an interview. And so, if you think marketing, right, like what are they there to do? Tell a story. And so you literally are hiring the best storyteller for the job.
Yeah, I mean, you've got to be an amazing storyteller. You've got to be creative. You've got to understand human psychology and how humans think and what they do. And sadly, we are moving into a very dangerous territory in the tech industry where there is an overabundance of growth mindset over marketing mindset. Yeah. And what happens is you basically have these droids that come into the company. So they're these like Star Wars droids who only know how to follow a piece of data and put an ad out. And we wonder why no one's really growing, no one's really building a lovable brand. Users aren't sticking around. They're actually fighting for survival every year because they're not doing anything sustainable and they're not doing anything meaningful. What they're basically just doing is saying, okay, we have a budget. The data says we should put money here, here, and here. Okay, let's go change some things and try and squeeze this channel 5%. I'm not saying growth doesn't have a place, and it is very important, particularly post Series A, maybe B. But what we forget is that the best person you will ever have in the company, who will not only reflect your brand and your marketing function, but they'll have a big impact on your customer service, your communications, your product, is a storyteller, right? Is a very creative storyteller. And what I find is there's just this ever-growing increase where I'm seeing a lot of very technical, analytical, the least creative people in the world going into these heads of growth positions where they're suddenly in charge of storytelling and selling. And it's concerning. And I hope that we realize that you need both, and they're both equally important, and one shouldn't be tramping on the other. They've got very different objectives.
Awesome advice there, Chad. Now we're kind of coming to a close, but before we do, you've been in fintech since 2016. I've been around, quite a while as well. The halcyon days, 2016 to 2020, it was, super exciting. It was innovative. You really felt like you were doing something special. And I got to say, it feels like it's gone a bit stagnant the last year or two. What is it that you're in a slightly different space now in digital assets and kind of the digital wallet space? What are you seeing, and what is what are you kind of clinging to that's got you excited and gets you energized and gets you out of bed in the morning?
I think that one of the amazing things about there's no denying that in the crypto industry there's been a lot of dodgy characters and there's been a lot of negative things, and sadly that has truly outshined all of the amazing things that happen within this ecosystem. As you might expect, the press play a very big role in that. And I joined Argent because they are one of the few companies that are doing it right. It's not about making money and getting quick bucks and launching tokens and all this kind of stuff. They've tried to build meaningful products that actually solve real problems, and they're achieving it because, one thing we spoke a lot about in fintech was this idea of we'll do good for the world. We will bank the unbanked, and we will help people escape
democratize finance. It's like, no, you're building an app and you're going to make some money.
And you're also not democratizing it because you're centralized in a massive regulated industry. What are you talking about? Whereas DeFi in particular, and if I look at Argent, we've had huge growth in developing parts of the world or parts of the world where the economy is not doing so well. A good example is our growth in Argentina, right? Because what we are a self-custody wallet, right? Which means that we never have access to your assets as a company, and nor can any regulator, central bank or government, right? So you truly have freedom, economic freedom. On top of that, the wider issue, though, is that people then succumb to issues locally, such as high inflation or corruption. And corruption can mean that they can tweet the wrong thing or attend a political rally and have all their assets frozen. They are maybe experiencing inflation upwards of 30%, so they are just never going to break free financially. And then we came along where they can store their assets into stable coins like USDC or DAI, so very secure, stable, trusted stable coins that are pegged to the dollar. They can then hold it there knowing that no one's going to take it away. They also escape inflation that way because, again, it's pegged to the US dollar, so it's not the peso or the local terrible currency that they're losing. And on top of that, they're then able to off-ramp it if they want to. So do they need a card where they can then daily spend, at the shops and the grocery stores, their crypto, and it works out way better for them than using their local bank card or using their local currency? And every day I just see messages from South America, from parts of Asia, where they are just like, thanks to you guys, I still have a roof over my head. I'm still able to pay for my kids to go to school. I'm still able to take vacations because we've genuinely solved a problem. And look, it's just like Revolut design-wise. It's a beautiful wallet. You can just fund it. You can unfund it. It will come with a card soon, where you can start making payments when you want to actually not just invest and hold it and earn in and stake it, but also make payments as well. So I think for me, it was very much what we've been trying to do is build the Revolut of DeFi, which is this one app, because DeFi and crypto is a very complicated industry, right? Trying to understand where everything is, how it works. So we've brought it all into one, simplified it. We're the most secure, probably the most secure wallet in the world. We have fraud monitoring, we have 2FA, we're fully self-custodial. So we have all those things that put people's alerts away in terms of like, oh, could this be another FTX or something like this, right? It's not possible. So again, I'm ranting, but for me, we're solving real problems for real people. We're using the best of blockchain technology, not the gimmicky memes and crap that you see online. And I'm proud to say that our users are real people. They're real, ordinary people. They're not bots or people with JPEG images everywhere. You know, it's a sort of sustainable, great company. And, you know, there's no slowing down. You know, while the industry is maybe in a long winter, it's not booming like it used to. You know, it will bounce back. And fortunately, we're kind of at the helm of, you know, the innovation in this space. So, yeah, it was a very long way of putting it, but...
Mate, it's fantastic to hear. And I think one of the things that's really, you know, I share your frustration. You know, I've got a lot of friends, network in the, you know, digital asset space. And I think the biggest frustration for me was just, you know, having, you know, being a recruiter in the GFC and my clients being investment banks. You know, this was meant to be the antidote to what I've seen back then. And unfortunately, we're seeing the same behaviors again and again. And I think, you know, to see that, you know, that it's actually being used in the right way, you know, with the right intent to help, you know, truly help people, I think is, yeah, mate, it's awesome to hear.
Yeah, agreed. But yeah, one thing, before we finish, one thing you did say as well is, you know, I've very much fallen out. I think fintech, I don't see anything that interests me anymore. It's just, like I said, I think we were very lucky. We were in the heyday. We experienced the highs. We got the dopamine hit. And now it's just sort of building level, you know, continuing to sustain the companies that made it, or you're seeing little spin-offs here and there solving sort of small problems.
I think, look, at the minute, look, I think it's in that part of the cycle, right? And, you know, it's very similar to where Australia was in 2017, right? We're kind of, you know, just trying to get the industry off the ground. And a lot of it was just being subservient to the banks and trying to kind of build with the infrastructure and pipes and plumbing. And then Afterpay and Zip came along and it changed everything. And, you know, then you guys came to us and that kind of changed everything. And I think we're just at that part of the cycle where, look, as a small country, like, we've got to just, you know, go where the money is, right? Like, that's the reality. And the money is helping keep bank executives out of jail with regulatory tech, right? Like, that's the reality. Mate, it's been fantastic to have you on. Before we wrap up, where do you go podcast-wise for stuff on marketing and tech? What are your favorite podcasts?
I would be honest and say that I'm yet to find a good marketing or growth podcast. Controversial. I've listened to many. So I
you need to start your own podcast.
People keep saying it.
You do, definitely, right? It's like the world does not need another podcast right now, right? But if you're doing it, definitely it does.
Yeah, people keep saying that, and I just keep finding a way to not do it. But I think you might be right there. But the one I am enjoying, if I were to give one besides yours, of course, is, it sounds cliche, but it's probably the 20 VC podcast. You know, some of it's not for me, but, you know, they do have a growth series at the minute where they speak to different growth and marketing execs across the tech industry, and you know, you will get some really amazing insights there, and they're now moving into product as well, so there's a lot of great products, so all the things that kind of interest me. And so yeah, I'd say if you kind of want to dive deeper in that area from reliable people, definitely give that series a shot.
We get amazing talent listening to the show in over 40 countries. If anybody's interested in Argent and careers at Argent, where's the best place for them to go?
Yeah, so we are still hiring. The best place to go is our careers page, funnily enough, or, you know, you can go on LinkedIn. Equally, never be afraid to reach out to people like myself or Itamar, our CEO, on LinkedIn. Always interested. But yeah, I think we've got a bunch of engineering roles out at the minute. We've got 1 or 2 marketing roles and an ops role. So there's a few bits out there. To be honest. Yeah.
And where can people download the digital wallet?
So you've got options. We are available on mobile and extension. So either go to the likes of Chrome store and you can have the browser extension wallet, which some people prefer, or just go on the App Store or Android and download the app there.
Mate, it's been awesome to catch up with you again. I've really loved this chat. It's been fantastic.
Likewise,
and thanks for all your insights as well. As always, folks, you can catch me on LinkedIn. If you're coming back, thanks so much for your support. And if you are new to the show, please follow us and share on your socials. It really helps me get great guests like Chad onto the show. Until the next episode, keep well. Fintech Chatter is presented by Tier 1 People, leaders in fintech executive search. We'll help you find world-class fintech leadership talent to build world-class fintech ventures. And you can find out more at tier1people.com.